A pastor and a priest walk into a movie theater. Hi, I'm movie geek Father Andrew Miller.
And I'm cinema lover, Reverend Michele Byerly.
And this is A Pastor and a Priest Walk Into a Movie Theater, a podcast about faith, life, and the silver screen.
Today, we're joined by two very special guests. They're a powerhouse couple of awesome theologians under whom Andrew and I had the honor of studying at St. Paul School of Theology. They are the wonderful Charmaine and Tony Chvala-Smith. Welcome to the show, you guys.
Oh, it's so good to be here.
Very good to be with you. And good to see you again, and good to not be grading your papers.
Though they were wonderful.
No grading this podcast. So I'm wondering if you'd say a little bit about yourself and introduce the movie we'll be discussing today.
Sure. I'm Tony, Anthony Chvala-Smith, and I'm the Paul E. Morden Seminary Chair of Religion at Community of Christ Seminary and Associate Professor of Religion at Grayson University, ordained in Community of Christ, and very, very intrigued by what we're going to be doing today. And I love the idea of trying to connect theology with the arts.
I'm Charmaine Chvala-Smith, and with Tony, assist in the seminary in our classes. And we have about 5-6 classes right now that we're teaching in the seminary, and 5 in undergrad over a space of 2 years. And then also I'm the chaplain for our seminary and a spiritual director and an ordained minister in Community of Christ. We work for the aforesaid institutions of the seminary and Graceland University, but we also work as consultants for the Community of Christ Church in the areas of theology and of scripture. So we keep pretty busy.
Yes.
I don't think I could handle that load.
Plus, occasionally we get to watch a movie, and you guys gave us the perfect excuse to do that.
Oh, good.
Yeah. So what movie did you pick for us? And can you get us started with some of the themes that you're hoping to talk about today?
All right. So the movie that we picked is called Maleficent, and it's a Disney movie. The star is Angelina Jolie, and it's Maleficent, Mistress of Evil, and it's the second in a 2-part series. The first is based loosely on the Sleeping Beauty story, and Maleficent is the fairy who cursed Sleeping Beauty. In this case, her name is Aurora, and but it has a neat twist at the end of the first movie. This one is a much closer study of Maleficent herself and discovery of relationship and of choices. And what else do you want to add to that as far as this overview of the...
The second one deals with issues of the efficacy of violence, and it deals with the power of love to create bridges across cultural divides. It has a lot of subtle and not so subtle political themes in it. This movie came out in 2019, and so it's right in the middle of a time when a lot of political critique was actually necessary, very, very needed.
And perhaps that's always necessary.
Yeah, and I suppose another important theme in this movie is the importance of discovering who you are, your core identity as a person, and learning to live from the core identity. I think that's a fun theme in the movie. So those are some of the things we love to deal with.
And there's a study of power, as Tony said. The power of transformation is a theme that runs throughout, of being transformed, but of choosing what it is you will be transformed by. And that's a choice we all have to face, sometimes daily, about what part of who we are will we give the upper hand to. And so there's some really, for me, that's spiritual and theological, those daily choices we make about the power that we have and what we will do with it for the sake of not only ourselves, but for others individually, but for the society that we're a part of, the world that we're a part of. So there's a bunch of themes that we kind of picked up on. We're just going to name a few of them, and then hopefully we'll get back to most of them. Maybe not, but we'll give you some themes that we picked up.
The coming to know oneself and act out of one's own identity, I felt was a really key growth in the character of Maleficent herself. Because I think, and I would select two parts of the film that I noticed that in. The first, she what really sets her off at the dinner party, what really gets her angry at the dinner party, is when Ingress, the evil queen, quote unquote, claims Aurora as her own. And so that it's sort of seen as a kind of arrogating of Maleficent's possession of her daughter. There's a kind of possessiveness in Maleficent, a kind of narcissistic possessiveness. And yet, I think in encountering her people and coming to realize who she is, she kind of lets go of that sense of narcissism and finds her true self, that she transitions from the false self of being possessive into the true self of being secure in who she is.
Right. And I think you picked up on a key aspect of that. For both Maleficent and Aurora, we'll say the spiritual journey involves a significant amount of letting go of what you thought you were, what you thought you had, what you thought you owned.
Who you felt you needed to present yourself to be to the world. Because one thing I noticed in the dinner party was that Aurora gives her this veil to put over her horns so that she would feel more comfortable.
Yeah.
Who's really comfortable there or uncomfortable? And at first, Maleficent does try to hide herself and tries to present herself in a way to the people. And eventually she's like, this ain't working. It's just not going to be that way.
Right.
And so I think that's reflective kind of what you guys are talking about. She sheds that as she goes along.
And yes, that's true both of Maleficent and of Aurora, that they both have to shed that pretending of who they are. And I'm going to go back to Andrew's first point, because maybe I'm defending Maleficent a little bit here, but this is just for the listener, this is the dinner scene that is the celebration of the engagement of Prince Philip and Queen Aurora. The parents are meeting. And it doesn't go well, obviously. But I think one of the things that is an ongoing theme and inner conflict for Maleficent is her knowledge of human nature. And so part of what she sees at this meal is, and we can call that sin, we can call it whatever we want to, and as far as theological terms go, but she sees the queen manipulating Aurora already. And she knows she can't protect her if Aurora is going to be in the queen's castle in Ulstead. And so that's part of the trying to defend, trying to protect Aurora from her innocence, from her own innocence about the nature of humanity, because she's had so little exposure to humans. And so there's this piece of Maleficent that is saying, I see something you can't see yet, Aurora, and you're going to need protecting from it. And of course, storyline proves that, yes, she did need protection from it. But
well, and Maleficent has been burned in the past. From the first movie, her experience with humans the first time was awful. It was painful. And so she has that wisdom.
Yeah. When her wings were taken away, cut off, stolen by someone, a human, she thought loved her, but basically wanted to use her as a pawn to get power. So exactly. Yeah. She's seen a lot, and she's gotten past some of that in order to be able to raise and love Aurora. But you can see why she's ignited when she sees the thing that she was most harmed by, and saying, am I going to let Aurora do this? So for listeners who are parents, there's going to be some ways of really connecting at that kind of visceral, physical part of, what is my role? Where's my sense of call as a parent challenged here as well? It's
an interesting study in what are the origins of violence, right? In the sense that, violence comes from multiple points. And one source of violence is possessiveness. And another source of violence is forcing some to conceal who they are and not taking seriously, not letting them be who they are. And another source of violence is the lie, the fables we tell in order to justify what we want. So Ingress has based so much of her behavior and her really destructive behavior and her planning and scheming around something that she claimed happened when she was little, that never borne out anywhere in the storyline that it happened that way. And you find yourself not actually trusting that Ingress is telling a true story, because inside the movie, she tells a number of lies to justify what she wants. And of course, I'm thinking, well, oh my gosh, violence and the lie, the Gulf of Tonkin resolution that began the Vietnam War in earnest was based on a false news report or a false narrative. And then if you think a little more recently, the Iraq War was begun on the basis of a false claim that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction that turned out to be a total lie. And so,
now we have the big lie about who won the election or not.
Exactly.
And people's willingness to take on the lie. I think it's near the beginning of the movie where Maleficent is interacting with people who are coming into the moors to steal fairies, to access resources with no respect, simply to take. She's making observations about human beings in that process. So that's another theme that keeps popping up as we go, that there is this lack of respect for what is the truth. And she can already tell that they've been told lies, because when they see her or when they react to her, it's from a storyline that she knows what it is. She can see the reactions. But of course, Aurora isn't aware of that. So she's aware of the lies that have been told about her, but feels helpless to affect them.
What struck me is I at first, so before watching this film, I watched the first one and then I watched this one. And then when the narrator introduces the film and introduces the lie that was told about Maleficent, and I thought, well, wait a minute. So all someone has to do is ask Aurora, their queen, what happened, right? And Aurora tells them, and bada bing, bada boom, that's settled. So I was kind of like, oh, come on. And then as I realized, fake news just has such a sticking power, and it doesn't, like, in the face of the obvious, in the face of clear verifiable evidence that you have access to, still the false narrative just pierces through, or like it connects with something that people desperately want to believe. And
is that a desire? And this is again both a spiritual and a theological question. Is there underlying this sense for people that they are a victim? Is there this embracing of that, or is there this sense of superiority that somehow we have to fight against that which is bad or lesser than us? It can be twisted a lot of different ways. We really know what the truth is, and those other people are naive or uninformed, and because they are, we can fear them and we can dehumanize them, or in this case, de-magicalize them, de-fairyize them. I don't know what the right term is. Make them less than.
Well, there's some themes in the movie that, of course, you both know that Professor Tony likes St. Augustine. Now, Professor Tony doesn't like everything about St. Augustine, but Tony finds St. Augustine absolutely fascinating theological figure and just so formative. And so in our traditions, we're used to just throwing around the word original sin way too much, way more than we should. What if what we really mean is original fear? That where all of this begins is in the existential fear of either not having enough, of not being enough, of not being recognized, and so on.
Of death.
Right, fear of finitude. And what if we mean original fear? Because you can definitely see this fear is motivating so much that's going on in the storyline of the movie, but also transfer to culture. Fear of the other, fear of those people across the border, fear that somebody is going to take something that I think is mine, fear that I'm being lied to, fear that there's something wrong with the vaccine, that it's going to micro track me. Original fear is a source of so many social ills. But the problem with fear is that it's illusory, right? And it's shadowy, and it's hard to get your hands on it. It's very easy to scapegoat it and put it on somebody else.
Well, and there's another part of fear that makes us the center. And so with the idea of some of the definitions of sin as being self-centeredness, selfishness, assuming that the world revolves around us. Hanging on to fear or multiplying fear can make us even more the center of at least our own world, if not the universe, which is what part of our ego says, well, of course, I'm the center of the universe.
Original ego. A lot of my reflection theologically surrounds the doctrine of original sin. I love the doctrine of original sin because I think it has so much explanatory power. And one of the ways that I love it is if we take it seriously, then we are allowed to divorce shame from sin. We are allowed to say that sin is not just, although it includes the things that I do wrong for which I should be punished. Sin is a sickness, it's insidious, and it infects me independent of my choice. And so at that point, I can have grace for myself and say, look, yes, I am a sinner. And yes, I do things that are immoral for which I should be punished. But on the other hand, there are ways in which, I can't really evade my ego. So I can take responsibility while divorcing the fear and the need to hide. Because if we go back into the story in the garden, to me, what really gets Adam and Eve kicked out of the garden, whatever that refers to, is their attempt to hide from God, their attempt to hide in their shame rather than admit responsibility and admit, I've got a problem and I need your help, Lord, to get over it because I now know things that I can't unknow.
Yeah, I think that's a point well taken. All I was going to add earlier was that in a very biblical fashion in the movie, love is what conquers fear. Not more strength, not more power, not more violence. Only love in the end conquers fear. And there's this great line in the movie where, so you've got these two sides, right? You've got two kingdoms basically against each other, the Moors and Ulstead. And there's this line towards the end of the movie that says, where they say, it's not where you're from, it's whom you love. And, my St. Augustine brain is just like whirring really fast when I hear that, because, for Augustine, the human condition is essentially about misplaced loves, right? And misplaced loves and wrong versus right kinds of loves. Caritas, the perfect love of the other for the other's sake, versus amor sui, self-love, which is the love of what the self wants for the self's own sake. And so it's only the love of the other in a graced way that conquers fear in the movie. So I think that's a really lovely theme.
One of the things that, you're talking about fear and love, one of my favorite scriptures of passages from 1 John, there is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear. Those who do not know love do not know God, for God is love. I did a whole study on that in my ordination process. And for me, that is my root of theology, really.
Well, and fear is Charmaine was saying, fear is the egocentric aspect of the self, whereas love is the other-centered aspect of the self.
Nicely said. Yeah, I like that.
It seems to me that original sin is found in two places. If I can pull the original movie, of course, the original sin, not so much Maleficent's original sin as in she did something wrong, but her encounter with what formed her into her own fear was, of course, the taking of her wings. And then I saw a kind of original sin when Aurora made the choice, and it was more of a choice on Aurora's part to side with, to choose her side, as Maleficent said, to side with Ingress against Aurora, thinking that Aurora had done something wrong. And yet then the kind of Christ moment that I think Tony pointed out, when Maleficent steps in front of the arrow and becomes the kind of Christ figure, not only sort of liberating her own self, although there's some heresy in that if we wanted to apply that to Christ himself, but the liberating her own self from whatever remnants of ego she had, but also I think liberating Aurora and helping to liberate Aurora further from any remnants of ego she had in the moment. And then of course the resurrection and the rising of the Phoenix.
And so many,
yes.
Everything's like, oh my gosh, it's just rife with religious themes.
So, and then the other thing I thought about was that sometimes original sin has been described as humanity's curse. And there was this line in the movie that curses aren't ended, they're broken. And so, and that is a theme that pulls from both movies. Maleficent lays this curse. She does everything she can to remove it, but she can't.
Yeah.
Right.
until her love breaks it at the end. But then I think we even still see remnants of things into the second movie. And then we really get that where it's not ended, it's broken.
Yeah.
And those actions of Maleficent break it for once and for all. And so I just found that really fascinating.
Well, there's a nice Wesleyan theme there. He breaks the power of canceled sin. He sets the prisoner free.
Is free. Yes.
We're all going to start singing here in a minute.
Right?
Yeah, I love that image of the curse being broken.
Mhm.
And then it creates the possibility of a whole new set of relationships.
Mhm.
And maybe while we're on this topic, there's another one that I think fits really well. And it's where Queen Ingress says, as she's recounting her childhood, where her kingdom is suffering, and they look across the border into the moors and the fairies are thriving. And she and her brother feel like the appropriate thing is to go in and take what they need. And this is very much this sense of privilege because of who you are. You deserve to have what you want, and you should be able to just take it away from other people who are other beings that are not as worthy as you. And again, that's about not having enough, but tied with it, the sense that somehow I am more deserving. I should have this because of who I am, rather than, she called her father weak because he wanted to ask them for help. And so it just really does that strong contrast of it's all about me and my power and my getting what I want, or having to be humble, to acknowledge our brokenness, our neediness, our need of each other. So I think those are some other of those places where it's really kind of nailed aspects of the human condition.
Absolutely.
And then with Ingress, it becomes an obsession of power and thinking she deserves everything, everything she can possibly get her hands on.
This is reminding me of a line. One of the people who I would identify as a spiritual guide for my life is Evelyn Underhill. And in one of her books, she says that we human beings, we spend most of our lives conjugating 3 verbs: to want, to do, and to have, all the while forgetting the most important verb, which is to be.
Be.
And so, yeah, exactly. So notice how doing, wanting, and having kind of are, I want Aurora. No, I want her. She's mine. I want what I want for the kingdom. I want you gone. I need to have X. I need to have Y to be secure. And so the movie ends then with a kind of celebration of what it means simply to be together. So there's a little spiritual parable in there about the negative power of wanting and having over against being. And all of us know how hard it is sometimes simply to be. There's so many things demanding our attention, and we need to get this done and this done and this done. And sometimes being is the last thing on our list. But yeah.
What do you think about what happened to Ingress at the end? About her fate? Because I have some thoughts on that, but I'm curious what you guys.
Good. So just for the hearer, what happens to Queen Ingress, who is the one who's created and perpetuated this war, is that when Maleficent has all of this power suddenly, she doesn't get rid of the queen. She turns her into a goat, a nice white goat with a nice collar. Nice diamond collar and horns, of course. So there's so many, it's cute in some ways. It disempowers this image of evil. And it's humorous. And it makes her the goat scapegoat that she was trying to create Maleficent as being. So there's a lot of different things. But Andrew, what did you come up with there?
Well, it sort of left me feeling with a sense of the problem of an anti-universalist understanding of salvation, in the sense that to me, her becoming a goat, and I caught as you did, I caught the symbolism there. She becomes the scapegoat for all of this. And my initial reflection was, well, I'm not sure that's such a good thing. And then I realized, and I'm not necessarily a universalist, but I realized, if her becoming a goat is a kind of damnation, that really brings along with it all of the problems, or it's so related to all of the problems of the initial scapegoating itself that was bad and wrong, that I just can't get over it, and I just can't get past it. And I wonder if that's one of the impulses behind a theological position, universalism. So
I start in a different place. I have a less orthodox view of sin and punishment and all of that than Tony does. And the idea that acknowledging that humans are sinful doesn't, for me, mean that they need to be punished, because I don't see punishment as producing anything positive in the big picture. I don't see it as consistent with what God is trying to do, which is to invite us into wholeness and into love. So,
Right.
But so what I would do with the goat is what I do with the word judgment. So when I think about God as judging, and you just have to look at the Old Testament prophets here, their role is to help people see themselves as they actually are. And so the idea of God judging is helping us to see who we really are, with the brokenness, with our humanness, with our frailty, with our need for a loving presence, power in the world that is not ours. All of those things I see as judgment, not as, you got to burn in hell for the designated amount of time in order to be purged, but to see judgment as helping us see who we really are. And so for me, that fits perfectly with the white goat with horns being Queen Ingress, is she is getting to see who she really is. She's being humbled and seeing what she has created. So that's where I went with the goat.
Editor Wesley here, dear listeners. Time for my now traditional mid-episode spiel. Thank you so much for listening, and thanks again to the Chevalier Smiths for being our guests. This isn't the first episode of A Pastor and a Priest Walk into a Movie Theater with guests aired, but it was the first episode with guests recorded, so we especially thank them for helping us blaze this trail. If you like what we're doing here, exploring how faith permeates art and modern life, and how we can draw wisdom from all sorts of sources, we encourage you to check out New Faith New Media's other podcasts. Faith and What Resonates explores faith and music, Faith and the Dice explores faith and gaming, and Breaking Fast with St. Sparklebear explores faith and food. We also welcome you to join our wider discussions on Facebook at www.facebook.com/groups/NFNM and if you feel so moved, we will invite you to check us out on Patreon at patreon.com/NFNM, where you can contribute at the $2, $5, or $10 a month levels to gain access to our special monthly comedy roundtable podcast and other behind-the-scenes bonus content. Thank you very much, and happy listening.
I saw in it a kind of critique of the idea of punishment as damnation as punishment.
Oh,
and there was a line that really caught it for me, was the king when he comes back, and they said, well, don't worry, we can turn her back. And the king said, well, if we want to. And to me, I saw in that a kind of like, no, we want to punish her. We want to keep, we want to do to her what she almost did to all of us. And I saw in that a kind of, the word that comes to mind bears witness embedded racism, mea culpa, a kind of darkness, and that a kind of, there is still work to be done to liberate the community from the power of sin. And it is that impulse that leads me to hope for universal salvation, because at the end of the day, if I keep imagining people who are damned as being punished, then there's something that's going on in my heart, or there's something that's going on in all of our hearts that's not quite yet resolved.
Yeah. Well, and ultimately the result is that there's no one here who's beyond redemption.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of a nice image to think about, that no matter who you are, what you've done, there is a path. Now, that may be a difficult path, It requires facing up to how you've hurt others. It requires acknowledging the harm, which I think that's, for me, if we want to talk about the embedded racism in American culture, the biggest issue is that we have not even begun to admit that it exists.
Exactly.
That we haven't acknowledged that this country was founded on the backs of slaves.
Right.
You know,
and on the genocide of the native inhabitants too.
Yes.
It's kind of a multiple.
Yeah.
Two prongs of racism there. Yeah.
Yeah.
And she was preparing a genocide. The movie was about the possibility of a genocide. And I saw in the Pixie, whose wings had been stolen, a kind of weapons researcher. I mean, there's so much. It was a chemical, biological weapons of mass destruction research laboratory.
It was weaponizing their dead. I mean, it was
Mhm.
weaponizing the dead of the Moors to kill the living. Yeah, I agree. And Lickspittle is the name of the pixie whose wings were taken by the queen, and he was trying to be something important in her eyes. Again, that whole giving up your identity in order to have approval or to have power.
He's Lickspittle is, I don't think it's an inapt comparison to say he becomes Ingress sort of Dr. Mengele. You know, he's the one who's experimenting on pixies and trying to figure out ways to fairies and ways to kill and mutilate and maim them. And so again, you know, fear of the other leads to actual diabolical acts, I think.
So one of the things, I'm going back to the goat, because I think that's its own little movie within the movie going on there. Because what's happening is that the evil is not destroyed. You know, in many movies and specific in American movies, there's the redemptive violence kind of thing. Like the good person will use better or cleverer violence to win, and that's okay because it's the good person who's doing it. And in this case, Ingress is not destroyed. She is defanged. She is neutralized. Her existence is not denied, but she no longer has power over other people. So like at the end where the pixie Lickspittle is there now free from her influence, and the captain of the guard and the soldiers are now free of her influence. She has been brought back to her humbled form. So I think that's its own kind of thing about what do we do with evil? Do we simply use more force to destroy it, and in the process destroy something in ourselves, which is what I would say happens in war, whether it's for the soldiers or for a nation, especially wars that are built on fear or unjustified or greed or colonizing, all of these kinds of things. So there's a whole bunch to be explored in that little scene.
Well, and sometimes what happens, especially like in Disney movies of the past, you would see, they call it the Disney villain death, where you'd see them like falling off of the parapet and they would just die and land. And usually it was because of something that they had done themselves. And so the message was evil kind of does itself in. But this is kind of a new, like you say, it's a new direction where it's still there. It doesn't have the power anymore.
You know, I think that's a really good observation about it. And I have to, this is a confession on my part. The myth of thank you, Father.
Just absolved.
The myth of redemptive violence is so deeply embedded in the American psyche, and including my own, that I saw the movie twice, and both times, because I forgot parts of it, but both times I expected Ingress to disappear, to basically be killed, and that somehow she deserved that. And she's not. She comes back as the goat, which reminds me of a great line in Thomas Aquinas. Aquinas says, "That which is received according to the manner of the receiver," meaning the way we receive grace is appropriate to what kind of being we are. And so she has the grace of continuing existence, but received in the form in which it's most proper for her, which is as a goat. So her being is not destroyed, but is now what she actually has become is the goat figure. But anyway, I do have to admit that I was in quite expectation that there was going to be, a tit for tat, and that she was going to be destroyed, and she's not. So the movie does kind of gently sort of try to frustrate that myth of redemptive violence, which I think is kind of cool.
I'd like us to say a little bit more about in general, the myth of redemptive violence, because I think there is some confusion. And when I started seminary 12 years ago, I actually had some confusion over what the myth of redemptive violence was. So, for instance, are you suggesting that the atonement is not redemptive? But of course, that's not what it means. But in any case, I think we should discuss it for the listener.
Well, sure. So, first of all, a mythos in Greek is a story. And typically it's a story that tries to explain either how things came to be the way they are, or a story that explains the eternal nature of things. Mm-hmm. So there are mythoi in the Bible. It's not a bad word. It's simply a word that refers to storytelling for a particular kind of purpose. So the myth of redemptive violence is a story that predates the biblical traditions, goes all the way back to ancient Sumerian and Babylonian civilizations. And the ancient Babylonian epic, the Epic of Gilgamesh. Right? It's older than anything in the Bible, and it's a story that celebrates redemptive violence. That is, that violence is woven into the nature of being, and it's a constant battle. And the only way to get the good is to fight and kill for it. Something has to die in order for something else to live. Now, in terms of natural science, I suppose one could say that's true. That is, that there's a constant exchange in the natural world. But the myth of redemptive violence is about human relations. And so, interestingly, the first biblical creation story, the one in Genesis, is a critique of the myth, right? There's, in the Babylonian creation story, the world is created through a battle, and it's created out of the carcass of a dead god, right? And so the Babylonian story celebrates violence as absolutely intrinsic to human relations
and creation.
Yeah, and creation. Whereas in the priestly creation story, Genesis 1, creation is an act of divine speaking. There's no conflict, no contest, no killing, and everything has a place. It comes into being through spoken word.
And equally,
right. And everything is good. Whereas in the Babylonian creation story, things are unambiguously messed up right from the start, right? And it's just like, well, this is the way things are. So there you go. That's the myth of redemptive violence. Biblical authors struggle with it again and again and again. It's because it's so deeply woven into ancient Near Eastern cultures. When you talk about the doctrine of the atonement, here's the thing. There's not one doctrine of atonement, right? The doctrines of atonement all begin by trying to interpret, what does it mean that Christ died on our behalf, or for us, or for sins, which the New Testament does not very methodically spell out. Mm-hmm. So different theories of the atonement have evolved in the course of the church's history
that are all biblically based.
Right.
And we came up with a list of about 9 different approaches to why does Jesus' death and resurrection matter?
Well, and what I got confused about when I was in seminary is that I thought that because we watched this video on progressive Christianity, and they were doing an episode on the myth of redemptive violence, and I was confused because I was like, well, are you suggesting that what happened to Jesus was not redemptive? And that's not what they were suggesting at all. In fact, one of my favorite theories of atonement is the last scapegoat theory. It's the one that, speaking of scapegoats, it's the one where Jesus's death reveals what scapegoating does. It kills God. It kills ultimate goodness. And now that we know that, we're free to not do it anymore. But it's interesting. I think Jesus's death sort of reveals what shows up redemptive violence for what it is. It's that which kills the good, the ultimate good, God. So
yeah. And in some Christian theologies, the redemptive violence is used. The idea that God killed Jesus when God should be killing us because of our sinfulness. And I don't buy that one bit. I would say the Christ figure is like Maleficent in turning us away from the harm and taking the arrow for us so that we can see that the power of love is. But there are some Christians who would say, yeah, God killed Jesus, and that's how redemption happens. So
kind of messed up. I mean, God killed Jesus when God wanted to kill you, and isn't that loving? It's like,
Yeah.
I don't think so.
I don't think so. I'm not sure how that works. But so there's so many other ways to construe it, and the fact that no ancient ecumenical council ever made a decision about what it means that Christ died for us ought to give us pause in our theology about saying, here's the one view of atonement that works. And the people who say that typically say, well, it's a penal substitution, that is, that it's a punishment and Jesus takes it for you. And it's, no, the ecumenical church has never said that. Has never said that that's what it is. It's too big. It's too mysterious. It's for goodness sakes, it's God, the Logos dies. Come on, we can't even get our minds around that. So, William Temple, one of my theological guides, great Archbishop of Canterbury, great Anglican theologian, says any attempt to explain the death of Jesus that does not focus centrally on love is misplaced.
Amen.
Amen.
This is, in some sense, we have to understand this as love on our behalf, and that's kind of Maleficent, in the way of the movie, acts that out. Finally, is willing to give herself for her daughter. And it changes the world. It changes the world in the narrative of the movie. So
there's so many other themes that we've noticed, and we know that the two of you have too. I think, Michele, you'd mentioned some things about from a feminist view.
Yeah. So for me, that's definitely a lens that I looked at, and the way that I put it is just being reminded of historically the ways in which there has been a mistrust of women with power. It's not that women have not had it, but there has been a very much a mistrust of it. And that's where you get things like witch hunts or attacks on women rulers and this anxiety around it. And for me, there is definitely a power metaphor and a power narrative from, Maleficent's wings being stolen in the first movie to this battle between these two very strong women, really. And to me, there is kind of this critique of the patriarchy, which is kind of the Ulstead, the way that they run. And then there's a very natural world, which is very feminine. And I think I also tie that into a lot of our issues around global climate change and how we treat the environment, because the earth has often very conceptually been the domain of the feminine. And as we've kind of overcome that, it becomes easy to do, kind of like we've talked about, to just take and take and take, because we have power over it.
Right, the violation of the ecological system.
Yeah, I mean, the word rape has been used. We rape our natural resources, and I know Andrew has mentioned this before, and I've definitely, it's a solid interpretation to say that what happened to Maleficent in the first movie of her wings being taken is rape in its form.
Absolutely,
because rape is about power over. And so from a very feminist kind of lens, it really strikes me that what you have here is a very strong, powerful woman who's trying to lead, who comes up against those forces that are against her, that mistrust her. And so there's definitely a patriarchy critique there.
Oh my gosh, yeah. And I picked up some other pieces. You got my imagination going here, because at the beginning, there's very much this two powerful women, both are evil, right? And then there's a third woman, and she's naive and hapless. She doesn't have any power. She's being used. And so it's that image that we get in some Christian ideas of the woman either as the virgin or the devil, one or the other.
Mary or Eve.
Yeah, the virgin whore dichotomy.
Yes, exactly. And so you see that at the beginning, but then it really does develop into something quite different. And it is ultimately, and we haven't really touched on this yet, I would say that a pivot point in the storyline is when Maleficent, in with all of her anger and her pain, comes into the midst of this battle scene. And Aurora comes to her and basically says, "Don't. I know you."
Mm-hmm.
And Maleficent says, you do not. And she didn't back down one bit. And Aurora says, "Yes, I do. You're my mother." And I think that's the pivotal point at which Maleficent chooses who she will be, which part of her nature she will respond to and react to. But it is that it's like Aurora is not the naive, feather-brained, lovely queen bouncing through the moors, this idyllic place, but there's wisdom. There's deep understanding, and there's a willingness to stand for it in the face of this destructive rage that she sees in Maleficent, and reminding her of who she is. So I think it does a lot of really interesting things. And actually, this is one of the things that disturbed me in the story. And there's a few things in it that it's like, but one of them was assuming, well, this is what Ingress says, but it's kind of played out in the character as well of King John. She sees her father, who wanted to ask for help from the Moors, and then she sees her husband, who wants to have peace between the kingdoms, as weak. And actually, in this whole movie, King John is seen as weak, blind to the fact that underneath the castle is this armory and this manufacture of weapons and this biological warfare happening. He's naive. It's a caricature of people who are for peace as being just seeing the thin, happily ever after kind of storyline, and not understanding the complexities of people and of the world and of how you different ways of working with things. So that was disappointing, that in order for there to be a strong woman, there had to be a weak man, with Ingress and John. But then also that the people who were for peace were seen as not understanding reality very well, or not being aware of things that were going on around them. But again, that can be an element of the patriarchal story, that if there's a strong woman, there must then be a weak man, and something to be careful of, I think, in that storyline.
That's a good point. Yeah.
So we often end the podcast by asking, one of us asks the other, so if you were writing a sermon on this film, what would be the takeaway for the congregation? So I guess we'll put it to you guys. If you two were writing a sermon on the film, what would be the takeaway for the Community of Christ congregation to whom you were preaching?
Wow.
That's a great question. And Community of Christ's theology preserves a strong instinct that goes back to the social gospel movement. And I would say, what kind of world do you want to create? What kind of world do you want to live in? That's connected to your choices now. And do you want to make choices based on love or fear? I think I could go someplace with that in a sermon, and maybe use Michelle's favorite text from 1 John.
Yes.
In my case, presuming the lectionary brought it up on that Sunday, so I wasn't cheating. But what kind of world do you want to create? Do you want to work from a vision of the reign of God, which is a reign of justice and equality and mutual love? Or do you want to create a world in which fear of the other and the consequent destructiveness that comes with that is going to be the storyline? So I think I'd go there.
That's powerful.
And I'm not sure. I mean, there's a bunch of them that I could go with, but one, I think, and this is in light of the nearness of Pride Month, and that would be focusing on this part of the storyline where Maleficent is the only one of her kind in most of this story, and she's misunderstood. She doesn't have anyone to reflect off of about if she's okay, who she is in this society. She knows she's misunderstood and feared. And with that comes so much pain and fury. And I think that's something I would want to tie into. In Community of Christ, we are working towards being a much more inclusive and welcoming community. And in this storyline, I thought of so many of gay, trans, gender fluid people that I know who have felt that isolation of being the only person they know who's struggling with what they're struggling with, or claiming their identity as they are claiming it. And to know that you belong, to know that there's people who understand who you are. And in the storyline, there's suddenly this group of fae, which is what Maleficent is. And within that group, there are those who want peace, and there are those who want war with the humans and to wipe them out, because they're being wiped out. They're being denied their real identity. So I think I would want to go somewhere with that. And Connell, who was the fae who was for peace and was helping Maleficent know who she was, even though she couldn't even imagine yet that she was the granddaughter of the Phoenix. He said something that just made me stop. And he's saying, you have the power to make something else happen, for another stage of transformation for the fae. And he said, take all of your fury and pain and don't use it. And it was wonderful. And I think, with friends who've been dealing with their sexual identity in a culture that isn't very welcoming, as much as we want to think it's becoming more so, but recent legislation would indicate that isn't the case. So, but to acknowledge, first, to be able to help people acknowledge the fury and pain, and then to also let them know that there is a place where they can love and be loved, and that fury and pain need not define who they are, who they will be. So I would want to go there. I'd need to work on the wording quite a bit, but I think that would be a magnificent place to go.
That's awesome. Well, Tony and Charmaine Chvala-Smith, thank you so much for joining us. And
Yes.
if ever you decide that you'd like to relax from your teaching schedule by having to watch a movie for work, please give us a call, and we'll definitely have you back on the show.
Yes.
So, Michelle, what movie are we talking about next?
Well, next time we will be looking at the Jurassic Park and Jurassic World series. And so there's a lot that you can talk about there. And so we're excited to check those out as well. So thank you for joining us today on A Pastor and a Priest Walk into a Movie Theater. A Pastor and a Priest Walk into a Movie Theater is a production of New Faith, New Media. Today, our definitions and editing was provided by editor Wesley Morrison Sloat. Music was provided by Gail Gallagher. New Faith, New Media has a variety of shows about faith and life, including A Pastor and a Priest Walk into a Movie Theater and Faith and What Resonates, which release on alternating Wednesdays. And we also have Breaking Fast with St. Sparklebear and Faith in the Dice that release on rotating Fridays. If you are interested in the work that we are doing, help us get the word out by sharing on Facebook, YouTube, liking, subscribing, all the socials. We would love to have that support. If you want to provide financial support, we have an opportunity for you to do that too. And we ask that you would become our patrons on patreon.com/NFNM, where you can give at varying levels, and you will receive special access to our comedy roundtable, Blessed Lunatics. There are many ways that you can support our work, and we are so grateful that you are part of our community as we delve into faith, life, and meaning, and the different ways that we experience that through the arts and life. Thank you for joining us.